Negotiations over funding for the Department of Homeland Security are reportedly stalled over intense disagreements. We're going to get an update here in just a little bit from Senator Tommy Tuberville of Alabama. But the issue, at least what they say, the Democrats are saying, it's the immigration enforcement tactics and accountability. Now, among the sticking points is the demand by Democrats for a ban on federal agents wearing masks during operations, something that was highlighted during a congressional hearing yesterday. It was an oversight hearing on the Department of Homeland Security. Here's one of the comments.
In America, we shouldn't have secret police. We shouldn't have masked government agents executing citizens in the streets. The Constitution does not give your agency the right to hide their faces while they kill Americans. People who are proud of what they do aren't hiding their identity.
Now, that was New York Congressman Tim Kennedy, a Democrat. Those comments, as was most of the others in the hearing, were a bit over the top. But the wearing of masks by law enforcement is a topic that I believe needs to be thoughtfully discussed. Joining me now is Justin Smith, former Colorado sheriff, who's now the executive director and CEO of the National Sheriff's Association. Sheriff, welcome to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening, Tony. It's good to be on with you.
I thank you for coming on and talking about this because I think very few conversations take place that are thoughtful here. People just run to conclusions here in Washington right now on this. But the Department of Homeland Security believes that masking is important to safeguard employees from online harassment. Now, according to DHS, there's been over a 1,300% increase in assaults against ICE officers. So there's a significant issue here of the well-being and the identity of these agents, their families. I mean, I was a police officer for 10 years. I understand all of that. We only had our last name on our uniforms. We didn't have the it'd make it a little harder to track down. But on the flip side, there's some valid points made against the masking of federal agents. That kind of incites fear. So what's being discussed in the law enforcement community at the state and local level?
Well, I can tell you, Tony, that, you did hit one of the important keys is doxing. Doxing is, relatively new. Back 20 years ago, 10 years ago, this really was not an issue of getting somebody's personal information on the web and threatening them and their families. So definitely there's an understanding of that issue. But on the other side of it, there's a recognition, as police officers, as human beings, we read other people's faces. We pick up cues and things like that. And so I recognize that when the public cannot see the face of an officer, it does create some discomfort. We get that. There's a reason that in local policing, we limit the use of masks. Sometimes undercover officers, that were involved in searching or serving warrants, sometimes SWAT teams for protection or during the cold. But we are cautious in general about, when and where you might cover your face. So I understand that's an issue. The real issue here is we need to get away from that and get to the transparency and accountability. I think the mask thing is a little bit of a diversion here that's unnecessary. I think there's ways to make sure you can still have that accountability and recognize the need to protect these employees and their families from doxing.
So let's talk about some of those ways that you can have that accountability. Because I think there are, as you pointed out, there are circumstances where it makes sense. But as a routine part of your uniform and equipment in normal policing, I think it's problematic.
I would agree with that. It's not the first way to go. I think we need to recognize that there are ways for the accountability. And you mentioned when you were a police officer, you had your last name on name tag on your shirt. And any office I've ever known or any department, the standing rule and typically in state statute, if a citizen comes up and asks, you have to identify yourself and give a unique officer ID number. So if they have an issue, they got a question, they have a complaint, they can tie that to a person. I recognize we're in a little different time, but I've heard suggested by other sheriffs that if they had a unique ID number that was prevalent on their uniform, that might suffice to know what that individual is. Now, you still have to be careful about doxing, but when you go and codify things like this, that gets really difficult. When is it too cold? When is there a medical need? when might you have dust or dirt or whatever, to codify that as a statute that you can't. It's more of a policy issue. As a sheriff, we set policies on how we were in uniform, when, how, and why. And so I think Congress has to be careful they're not politicizing this. They're really getting down to the accountability.
And that's so often it's reactive here, and it's not, and it actually creates more problems. But is there any concern that what the federal government does, let's say they continue using masks and this becomes kind of standard, is there any concern that begins to filter down?
It does. When you lack that, what might be seen as lacking transparency, it does further degrade public trust. And we know it's a worldwide issue. Trust in institutions has been down. And certainly you're seeing some of that. And I'll flip over the comment that was made by the congressman or senator about the wearing of masks. One of the things we keep in mind is these officers and agents are up against protesters who are also wearing masks and hiding their identities. So it's a two-way street here.
Well, and I think, there's circumstances like in those environments where they're in the street, there's riots or there are people, there's crowds. But if they're just like in normal stopping individuals, and it's becoming kind of it appears to be a routine undertaking by the federal agents there in these cities, is the wearing of the mask, no matter what they're engaged in. I think that, again, I'm kind of sensitive to this. It's been a number of years since I was on the street, but when I was on the street, we had one uniform. We wore a Class A. Well, we had two uniforms. We had a Class A, and we would have a regular uniform. We didn't have these fatigues. And I think the way law enforcement dresses affects the way they act. And I just think with their masks, there's a sense of anonymity, and it concerns me, Justin. I think it's something we have to look at very, very closely. We got about 30 seconds left. I'll give you the last word.
I agree. It comes down to one of those issues of that professionalism. You knew it as officer presence, how you come across to somebody, and you want to show authority, but you also want to show respect. And there has been a lot of debate about how we dress, how we look, and certainly the hiding of the face. Again, it makes people nervous. Look through COVID and see how we talked about how a lot of children had issues because they couldn't read faces, and it was a developmental issue. So it's a broad issue, and I appreciate that you're looking at it sincerely.
Well, Justin, I'm consistent. I was against the mask back in COVID, and I'm kind of against them now too. So, hey, thanks so much for joining us.